Hi, John Herman here with another weekly lesson. Today I'd like to spend a little time supplementing last week's study on Judaism. This is because we're basically tied to this faith by association, even though we do not exactly see eye to eye. What I want to do is look at some of the reasons Jews do not believe that Jesus was, in fact, the promised Messiah. Much of the information I collected came from an internet source called Judaism Online. I wanted to go straight to the horse's mouth, shall we say. The site includes articles that were written by various Jewish authors and rabbis. To start with, all Jewish arguments regarding the coming Messiah are biblically supported in the Tanakh, also known to Christians as the Old Testament. Jews contend that Jesus does not support any of these prophecies, even though we Christians use the same writings to argue our beliefs. So what's going on here? Let's take a look at some verses. I'll include them for reference, but we won't read each one. I encourage you to do that on your own, though. Okay, here's one verse. It comes from Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 27 to 28. The Messiah will cause the third temple to be built. In these verses, Ezekiel predicts that a descendant of David will rebuild God's sanctuary, which will last forever. A few chapters later, Ezekiel is given detailed instructions as to its exact dimensions and construction. You should read it sometime. It's an engineering marvel. The Messiah will gather all of the dispersed Jews back to Israel, according to Isaiah 11, verses 10 to 12. He will usher in an era of world peace, again, according to Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 9. He will spread universal knowledge of the God of Israel, which will ultimately unite humanity as one. That's from Zechariah chapter 14, verse 9. Now, regarding all of these events, Christians believe that they will occur after the second coming. In Judaism, there's no such concept of a second coming. The true Messiah will perform them outright. He'll cause the third temple to be built. He'll gather all the dispersed Jews back to Israel. He'll usher in an era of world peace, and he'll spread universal knowledge of the God of Israel. Now, let's continue with some more Jewish requirements for the true Messiah and arguments against the Messiahship of Jesus. First of all, the Messiah will be a descendant of David on his father's side, according to Isaiah 11, verse 1. Note that Christians say that Jesus had no earthly father. This is a clear problem. The chronology in Matthew and Luke has Joseph as the descendant of David. Okay? Further, Jews point out, though, that Joseph had different fathers in each of these two accounts, even though he was ultimately tied to David. In Matthew, Jacob was Joseph's father, while in Luke it was Heli. Jews say that both accounts are therefore to be questioned, since they don't agree. All right, another point. Jews say that the Messiah will have human parents and have no supernatural abilities, such as raising the dead, walking on water, healing the sick, and so forth. That's according to Numbers 23:19. Jews believe that God assumes no physical form. Jews contend that by saying that God assumed a human form makes him small, and it diminishes both his unity and divinity. Another item, the Messiah will lead the people to full Torah observance. Anyone who tries to change the Torah is a false prophet. They point to the fact that Jesus was constantly contradicting the Torah. For example, they give where John records that Jesus made a paste to heal a blind man, which caused the Pharisees to say, "He does not observe the Sabbath." To the Jew, Jesus has not fulfilled any of these requirements. Therefore, he cannot be the Messiah. They believe that he lived, and they believe that he had a valid teaching, such as love, forgiveness, and so forth, and that he positively affected people who listened. But he was just a man. Now, I read in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis had a comment on such a view, and I'm going to read it. This is C.S. Lewis speaking. "I am trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him," meaning Jesus, "and that is, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God." Lewis said that that is one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who said he was a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make the choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him or kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not let that open to us. He did not intend to. Okay, that was C.S. Lewis's view. To summarize, the Jewish belief is that the Messiah will build the third temple, repatriate the scattered Jews back to their homeland, usher in a messianic age of peace, and promote a global understanding of the true God, and that is the God of Israel. If he did not succeed to this degree, or he was killed, he surely is not the promised Messiah of the Torah. In addition to the failed requirements we just spoke of, Jews believe that there were mistranslations of the scriptures to validate Jesus as the Messiah. These are some that they point out. The virgin birth. Jews say that Isaiah's description of a virgin birth in chapter 7, verse 14, has been mistranslated. Isaiah writes, "As a sign, the virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." The Hebrew word used by Isaiah here for virgin was almah. This means young woman, but not necessarily a virgin. Jews point out that there is another word in Hebrew that only indicates sexual purity, and that is betulah. They argue if Isaiah really meant virgin, why didn't he use that word? Their answer, of course, is that translators skewed the meaning of Isaiah's choice of word to support Christianity. Note, an unbelievable amount of time has been spent arguing about this very issue over the centuries. When all the smoke clears, my opinion is that there is not a definitive answer either way. If you have a few days with nothing to do, start looking into it from both sides. Your final opinion will probably be what you wanted the outcome to be in the first place. Just my opinion. Here's another mistranslation. This is about the suffering servant. Here we're talking about all of Isaiah chapter 53. Some of these verses are usually read around Christmas and Easter. Here's a few examples to jog your memories. Verse 3. "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering." Verse 5. "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him." And one more. Verse 7. "He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led to a lamb, like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep before her shears, he is silent. So he did not open his mouth. Now to us, there's no question as to who Isaiah was speaking about, but the Jews see it differently. They claim that this chapter is a continuation of chapter 52, which does in fact speak of the people of Israel. In that chapter, Isaiah uses words like servant and my people and Zion to refer to his people, especially those living in Jerusalem. Jews point out that Isaiah uses the singular form to describe his people. For example, he writes, "Awake, awake, O Zion." It is clear that he uses the singular form Zion to refer to the whole Jewish community. Isaiah treats God's people as a unit, talking about them as if they were one. Therefore, they argue, in the next chapter, when Isaiah speaks of he, for example, Isaiah is actually talking about the people of Israel, not a Messiah. That, of course, begs the question, why would God want the people of Israel to suffer, especially for the sake of others? The Jewish response is this: all people deserve punishment. However, God realizes that the people of the world would not react to divine punishment, resulting in a greater faith to him. Therefore, God lightened the punishment on those people of the world and transferred that punishment to the righteous Jews. It assumed that these Jews will understand that receiving punishment from God is an act of love, just as a punishment from a father to a child is given in love so that the child will learn and grow. They point to the fact that they have silently suffered at the hand of the Gentiles for nearly their whole existence. Now, let's look at a few more issues regarding the New Testament. Some Jews also raise the question of St. Paul's character. They claim that Paul confessed to using lies and deception to win converts. These so-called deceit calls into question the believability of everything that Paul said, which makes up about half the New Testament. Here are two of the offending verses. One is Romans chapter 3, verse 7, and this is what they're pointing to. If through my lies God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? That would lead you to believe that he's lying to convert people. Another one in Philippians chapter 1, verse 18. In every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Jesus is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Now again, if you just read those words, you say, well, yeah, maybe they got a point. But just from those snippets, it sounds to me like Paul was more like the proverbial used car salesman than an apostle. Now, if there were more time, I would discuss these offending lines, but I strongly invite you to read them for yourselves and form an opinion. But keep in mind that one of the paramount rules of Bible study is to view passages in context. I am very confident you will not find these examples damning to Paul. It's what the Jews choose to exclude from their argument that bothers me, as you will immediately see if you read them in context. Now, let's look at a few other verses that refute Jesus' messiahship. John chapter 7, verse 5. For even his brothers did not believe in him. Well, that's initially true, but I ask you, who is later described by Paul in Galatians as one of the pillars of the church? None other than James, the brother of Jesus. People can change their minds when presented with the facts. In Luke chapter 4, verse 16, Jesus went to the synagogue in Nazareth, where he had been brought up. he read a passage from Isaiah to the people and hinted that he was the anointed one of God, who Isaiah had just spoken of in the scripture that he read. Jews then immediately jump over to verse 28, where they point out the crowd's reaction. When they heard this, all the synagogue were filled with wrath, and they rose up and put him out of the city and led him to the brow of a hill on which their city was built, so that they may throw him down headlong. But now, as Paul Harvey used to say, for the rest of the story, the Jews conveniently gloss over verse 22, which occurs immediately after Jesus suggests that he is the anointed one of God. In verse 22 it says that all spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son, they asked? That's the point at which all things went south. Up to this point, the crowd had accepted him graciously. But then, Jesus told them that prophets were not welcome in their hometown. He further reminded his audience that other prophets, Elijah and Elisha, for example, had ministered to the Gentiles before they ministered to rebellious Jews. Saying that Gentiles were more worthy of God's blessings than they were was what really set off the crowd. That's when they took violent offense. They didn't want to accept the truth. Finally, I want to point out that Jews do not accept the concept of the Trinity. The basic tenet of their belief is summarized in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, which says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." In Jewish law, worship of a three-part God is considered idolatry. One of the three cardinal sins. A Jew ought to prefer giving up his life rather than transgress one of these. Now, I hope these arguments have at least inspired a little thought on your part. And again, I encourage you to go back and read some of the referenced argument verses and to read them in context. That's the main thing. My 20-minute discussion attempting to encourage a conclusion is almost an insult to those brilliant theologians and scholars who have spent hundreds of years debating these and other points from both sides. If you spend enough time, you'll either come away further convinced of your beliefs, or say to yourself, maybe they have a point here. Shalom.